Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of Congregational Humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister. Welcome.
Good morning and welcome. It's good to be gathered with each and every one of you in our virtual space, all with one common focus here. We're very glad you're here with us this morning. Here are a couple of announcements as we get started. After assembly today, make plans to join us for our virtual coffee hour. It's good to see each other's faces, and we use the breakout rooms feature to catch up on each other's lives and hear a little reflection about the talk this morning. So we hope you'll watch the chat space for the link to the virtual coffee hour. And here is news from Operation Share the Warmth. This week, we collected and sorted over 100 coats that we will share with the children of the Love Works Academy. We did this in partnership with the Land's End Clothing Company, and we're so grateful for your support. You have contributed over $1,000 to this effort. We're looking for more opportunities to be in partnership with our tenants, the Love Works Academy, and thank you so much for your efforts in Operation Share the Warmth. Our theme this month is healing, and our opening words are adapted from a poem, Lay It Down, by UU minister Joan Javier Duval. Here is where you can lay it down. Lay down all that you have carried, the weight of the world that has rounded your back, leaving you aching and exhausted. Here is where the healing begins, where burdens are set down, and alongside one another's, their magnitude does not seem as great. Here is where the door is thrown open and the light can lift away the shadows, and what was hidden can now be seen. Here is where you can rest, where nothing is expected but that you bring all of who you are into the presence of this loving community. Come, together we assemble.
Each week when we gather, we light our chalice and share one of the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism, or one of the aspirations of our congregation. This week we light the chalice remembering our aspiration to support one another's journey toward meaning and connection in the here and now.
Now for our congregational covenant. Love is the spirit of this place, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Good morning. I'm Allison Wyeth, Director of Religious Education for First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. I'd like to welcome all our kids and youth and invite them to gather round for our time for all ages. This month our theme is healing, and later you'll hear some more about that idea. Right now, I'd like to start with a question. Do you ever have a really big worry or persistent, unpleasant thoughts that you don't really feel comfortable sharing? I know that sometimes happens to me. And you know what? It sometimes happens to nearly everyone. So, what to do? Well, let me share a story with you that gives us a lot of ideas about what to do. You've Got Dragons by Catherine Cave. Dragons show up when you least expect them. You turn around and there they are. Am I dreaming? You wonder? And you pinch yourself hard, but you're not. You might not believe this is happening to you, but it is. It really is. You've got dragons. You might say to yourself, why me? Why did I get dragons? Was it something I did? I haven't always been really good, but I do really try, and I've certainly never done anything to deserve this. You're right. Nobody deserves dragons. You certainly don't. You didn't get them because you're bad. All these people have dragons, and they're really, really good. And since dragons can be scary, you might try to pretend yours isn't there, but it is. Pretending a huge, great, enormous dragon isn't there is exhausting. So sooner or later, you stop pretending. Then you say, okay, it's there, but it isn't a dragon. It's a mouse. Who's afraid of a mouse? But that's some mouse. Look at its shadow. Deep down, you know it's a dragon. You're still scared. And once you've got dragons, you can't easily get away from them. They pop up all the time. When you wake up, when you go out, when you go to bed and turn off the lights, especially when you turn off the light. So sometimes you leave it on. You don't want to think about dragons, but you do all the time. You make silly mistakes because of the dragons. You might be worried that people won't understand, that if you try to explain, they might think you are weird, so you might not say anything. Dragons make everything complicated. Sometimes people try to talk about them when you don't want to talk. So how's the old dragon? Or sometimes when you do want to talk, they're too busy, or they don't want to listen, or they don't understand, or they want to do all the talking. Let me tell you about my dragon. When you've got dragons, you need lots of hugs. But most importantly, you won't have dragons forever. You think you will, but you won't. You ignore your dragons, you hide from them, you shout at them, you pay attention to them, and you can't think of anything else, and you get hugs when you need them, and then suddenly, dragons leave when you least expect them to. You wake up and they're gone. After all your hard work, your dragon is gone. And now you know what to do the next time you get dragons. And our story has a few more bits of helpful advice for you. If you've got dragons right now, or just want to get ready for handling them when they come, give your dragon your full attention at least once a day. Dragons get bigger when they are ignored. Really get to know your dragon. Give it a name. What sort of dragon is it? Look at it hard and then draw a picture of it. If you make your dragon laugh, it might get smaller. Try telling it jokes. Talk with someone else about your dragon. And remember to get plenty of hugs. Ask for one right now. And that, friends, is how you deal with dragons.
Until that ball and chain is off my brother. Until that ball and chain is off my sister too. It doesn't matter, we don't share the same mother. I'll be standing there right up next to you. Lord, give us the courage to find our voice, support one another, make a conscious choice. all come together and take a stand. Justice for everyone across this land, until that ball and chain is off my brother. Until that ball and chain is off my sister too. It doesn't matter, we don't share the same mother. I'll be standing there right up next to you. Silent no more, it's time to walk in the light. Join hands with the righteous, we gotta do what's right. Step up and heal this racial divide. We're all one people, let's stand on the same side. Until that ball and chain is off my brother. Until that ball and chain is off my sister too. It doesn't matter, we don't share the same mother. I'll be standing there right up next to you. Lord, unite us in peace, unite us in love. Send us mercy and healing from the heavens above. Speak truth to power, let justice reign, justice reign, so we never have to face another day like this again. Until that ball and chain is off my brother. Until that ball and chain is off my sister too. We'll be standing by your side until your freedom is not denied. And we'll rejoice along with you. We'll rejoice along with you.
Founded in 1881 and the birthplace of Congregational Humanism in 1916, First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis is a congregational humanist community dedicated to a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Help us get our message of community and liberation out to the world. You can give on PayPal, the Give Plus app, or a website. Thank you.
On Sundays when we gather, we take a few minutes to reflect on the joys, sorrows, and milestones of the human experience. We do this so that we stay in touch with our own humanity. We do this to remind ourselves of the value of a moment of stillness. And we do this so that no one among us is alone, either in celebrating joy or in facing the burdens of life. This morning, we share a sorrow about a friend from one of our sibling congregations, the First Universalist Church of Minneapolis. Cecilia Newton, a longtime member there, died last Sunday after a brief time in hospice care. Cecilia was known by many here in our FUS community as a nonstop activist on justice issues, from marriage equality to reproductive justice to climate change. FUS member Madeline Chochi describes Cecilia as a hardworking, reliable, and fun-loving member of the team. And Madeline remembers that Cecilia spoke up in a room of 3,000 people against the Polymet mine, even though she was scared to do it. Cecilia worked as an educator in the Minneapolis schools for 35 years, and those of us who knew her will miss her presence and her joy. An online memorial service will be held at a future date. We now take a moment of silence to reflect on all the challenges and heartbreak going on in our lives and across our country. In this time of political uncertainty and accelerating pandemic, we pause to think with gratitude of those who are providing care for the sick under increasingly arduous circumstances. May they and we find spaces of peace and safety in the difficult weeks to come. And may we think with gratitude of all those who are leading lives of justice and compassion. Let us now share a moment of silence.
Well, if you've listened to me any length of time at all, you know that the 19th century American poet Emily Dickinson is my favorite poet. I've long loved her work because of her ability to express deep truths using very limited materials. Emily simply never saw much of the world during her lifetime. Yet the very simplicity imposed by the limitations in her experience and education created the power in her imagination. And so here's a little poem from her. There's a certain slant of light winter afternoons that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us, we can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it any, 'tis the seal, despair, an imperial affliction sent us of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens, shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. And no, this poem is not about death. It's about something much more subtle. It's how light affects our emotions. Heavenly hurt it gives us, because this sort of hurt is both painful and somehow sublime in its melancholy often. Now, sure, nowadays we can name what Dickinson was talking about, SAD, seasonal affective disorder, but again, it's much deeper than that. There's another aspect to the sort of hurt that Dickinson's describing. We can find no scar, not a physical one anyway. Instead, the hurt is internal, where the meanings are. But Dickinson isn't merely saying that we have seasonal emotions that no one sees. The hurt is where the meanings are. Emily understood the psychic space where each of us grapples with the symbols and metaphors and stories of our lives, trying both to make sense of what is happening to us right now and also attempting to find the way forward with those symbols and those metaphors and stories that create the meaning in our lives through the narrative. Yeah, as Allison was talking about, it's a way to get through those dragons. As a way of healing and as a way of reaching that most sublime of emotions, I would say gratitude, how do we get to a place where we can simply say to life, thank you? And that's what I want to think about today. Phobos, Phobos, was the god of fear in Greek myth. It's where we get the English word phobia, but Phobos of old wasn't about phobias as we understand them today. Phobos was the child of Ares, god of war, and Aphrodite, god of love. When Phobos passed by, fear and panic followed in his wake. As a child of both Ares and Aphrodite, Phobos created fear and panic in both war and in love. Now, in personifying emotions such as fear helps us to identify those feelings and maybe to locate them in some kind of a narrative frame for ourselves. Emily Dickinson wrestled with a feeling most of us have had, some kind of a deep melancholy brought on by looking out the window at a gray winter afternoon. The attempt to name emotions is why people turn to poetry, I think, both readers and writers of poetry like me. The Polish-American poet Czesław Miłosz once wrote, "The purpose of poetry is to remind us how difficult it is to remain just one person." The purpose of poetry is to remind us how difficult it is to remain just one person. Miłosz doesn't say that the purpose of poetry is to help us get through the difficulty of remaining just one person. He says that poetry exists to remind us of the difficulty of remaining just one person. That's the difficulty of psychic integration and integrity, and that feeling of wholeness that can be very fleeting and very elusive indeed. Well, polling back in March of 2020, in the early days of the pandemic, found that 1/3 of Americans at that time were reporting adverse effects on health and well-being. By June, that number was well over 50%, and it continues to rise. Social isolation, worry about family and friends, job loss, job insecurity, political and social dislocation and dysfunction. These anxieties manifest themselves in difficulty sleeping, problems with eating, increasing alcohol and substance abuse, and the worsening of what were already chronic conditions in many of us. Over half of the US population and rising. And experts think it's likely to get much worse with the advent of the winter, just as those numbers keep going up now. That certain slant of light on winter afternoons is going to be tough on a lot of people this particular winter. One of the recent turns in the study of the mind that I find very, very interesting is called affective, AFF, affective neuroscience. And that's the study of human emotion, not as a separate and somehow unfortunate feature of being human, but in the context of our evolution inside our bodies and our minds. In the past, we have focused on the reasoning mind. That's the good thing, right? An evolutionary trait that goes back, 40, 50,000 years when we started decorating the dead and with burial practices and doing some cave painting. But the fact is, and affective neuroscience is finally digging into this, the human brain has been developing a whole lot longer than 50,000 years, something more on the order of 200 million years. This is the time scale of our human emotions. And in that length of time, emotions, feelings have become so integral to our consciousness itself that we can miss what's actually going on. We don't feel it in our bodies, and because we aren't really working on it, it's just happening, and we can't name it. We don't have words for it. We don't even notice how hard we're working to remain just one person. And one of the interesting aspects of this research is looking at how we've developed the so-called social technologies to help us regulate our emotions over these millennia. Social technologies, like government and religion. And we know that the oldest is religion. And the research is clarifying, I think. It's not that we have religious feelings, that, the God-shaped hole that religious people sometimes talk about, but rather we have pre-existing feelings that we have come to call religious, feelings that we have come to classify as religious feelings. Again, millennia. From this point of view, religion is a common human project. It's a way for us to take care of ourselves and others by creating structures to regulate our emotions, by channeling our communal actions. It would probably be difficult to, convince some Presbyterians in Kansas that going to church falls into the same category as primate social grooming, but affective neuroscience tells us that singing hymns and picking fleas off each other function in much the same way when we look at it in our deepest emotional wiring. Both of them are social technologies to help us with our emotions. Some folks might resist that analogy, but for me, it's very, very clarifying. The religions that human beings have developed over the millennia are mechanisms for regulating our emotions. And we do ourselves a disservice to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And of course, that's why we have such a thing as congregational humanism. Some of you know that I've practiced Buddha-style meditation for decades, back since I was in my 20s, which has been a while. I came to see the benefits of meditation long before the mindfulness thing came along. But I also understood very early on that the religious trappings of meditation really didn't have anything to do with what meditation was able to do for my mind. And some of you also know that I'm a big fan of Stoicism. And I'm a completely unimaginative Stoic practitioner because why reinvent a 3,000-year-old wheel? No particular reason. I don't feel any compunction to believe what the Stoics did. That was a long time ago. But Stoicism is a very well-developed mechanism for regulating emotion. We know it works by the simple fact that contemporary cognitive behavioral therapy is modeled after ancient Stoic practices. It works, in other words, if you work it. Now, the Stoics use 4 mental exercises to tune up their emotional states. Premeditation of adversity, contemplation of death, contemplation of the whole, and contemplation of the sage, they called it. Premeditation of adversity, contemplation of death, contemplation of the whole, and contemplation of the sage. And you can look this up in a quick web search and find all this stuff out. So I want to think about these for a moment, however. Premeditation of adversity. I talked a few weeks ago about doom scrolling. This is new phenomenon going on. Well, too many of us stop reading news these days. Doom scrolling as if it's going to be something at the bottom. There's going to be some kind of an answer to all of this or some happy ending, but we all know there is no bottom to the news. It just keeps coming. There's always another news flash. Doom scrolling. So you think you're thinking of the worst sometimes, huh? I have a feeling that you're not. The Stoics would say, no, you need to really catastrophize to get over this doom scrolling. How about, bloody civil war, hundreds of thousands killed, the breakdown of the infrastructure of the nation, leading to wider spread pestilence and famine and invasion by the Chinese, whatever, but that's catastrophizing. And compared to that, lots a few more weeks of some wrangling over election results. The Stoics say, go on, go for it. Imagine the worst case scenario, and you know what? You're gonna feel better. Then there's contemplation of death. About the same thing. Sure, the next several weeks are going to be difficult for everybody here in the United States, but you know what? All of us are going to be dead soon enough. Memento mori, remember death. Dead people are not worried people. All the sound and fury of pandemic and government and all the rest mean nothing to them. The rest is silence, as Shakespeare said. So enjoy this sound and fury while it lasts. See, if you can find your way to accepting this imperfect world, you can at last say, thank you in gratitude. Then there's the contemplation of the whole. You've heard of the overview effect that astronauts talk about. Imagine a space station view of the Earth. The United States, you can't see anything about lines on that green and blue planet, can you? All those divisions just aren't there. And no, actually, you can't see the Great Wall of China from space. The poor human attempts to make a dent on our reality just don't add up to much. So now, don't sweat the small stuff. And yes, almost all of the smoke and the dust is small stuff when measured against time and space and reality. And then there's the contemplation of the sage. What would wise people do in this particular event? What would the masters of Stoicism, such as the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, do? Well, actually, we know what he did do. He spent most of his time as the mightiest human being on the planet in military camps, on horseback, fighting people who would eventually overwhelm the Roman Empire anyway. He was doing his duty as he saw it. In the face of one of the longest and the worst plagues in human history, the emperor worked to stop the spread of the disease, and he died of the disease. He did his duty as he saw it. That's what a sage would do. Doing what can be done and not worrying about what can't be done. That's the essence of Stoicism, and it's super simple, and it's the hardest spiritual practice of them all. It's difficult work remaining only one person, not flying into fragments, not doing the foolish and impulsive thing, not doom scrolling. It's tough looking out that window and seeing that certain slant of light. If it hurts, there's no need to smile. It hurts. That certain slant of light can be very, very hard on our minds. If it hurts, say so. We human beings have developed structures to combat that tough stuff in these millennia. And most of those structures have something to do with reaching out. Tell somebody, talk to somebody, use the social structures that we have. Your ministers of FUS are here for you. The members are here for you. You have people. You're not alone in the adversity. You're not alone experiencing those human emotions that spread back 200 million years. And yeah, those can be difficult. It can be hard sorting through them, but we have people. We human beings have had a long time to work on getting human consciousness right. And no, we haven't quite done it yet. It's tough, but there's always a way to go for the hope. There's always a way to remain just one person. There's always a way to get back to that gratitude, that thank you. So as a conclusion, I'd like to read a poem. This one is called Thanks. It's written by contemporary American poet W.S. Merwin. He writes, listen, with the night falling, we are saying thank you. We are stopping on the bridges to bow from the railings. We are running out of the glass rooms with our mouths full of food to look at the sky and say thank you. We are standing by the water, thanking it, standing by the windows, looking out in our directions, back from a series of hospitals, back from a mugging. After funerals, we are saying thank you. After the news of the dead, whether or not we knew them, we are saying thank you. Over telephones, we are saying thank you. In doorways and in the back of cars and elevators, remembering wars and the police at the door, in the faces of the officials and the rich and all who will never change, we go on saying thank you, thank you. With the animals dying all around us, taking our feelings, we are saying thank you. With the forests falling faster than the minutes of our lives, we're saying thank you. With the words going out like cells of a brain, with the cities growing over us, we are saying thank you, faster and faster. With nobody listening, we are saying thank you. Thank you, we are saying, and waving, dark though it is.
Join me from home in our Extinguishing the Chalice words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. All of these we carry in our hearts and in our minds until we are together again.
Thanks to everyone for making today possible. We are here for you at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. In the words of the Unitarian abolitionist and transcendentalist minister Theodore Parker, be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space. Its shrine, the good heart. Its creed, all truth. Its ritual, works of love. Its profession of faith, divine living. So may it be.
Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.